I just want to echo what Erin said. Thank you all so much for joining us, and Kira, especially thank you for joining us after what's been a busy week for you. Yeah. So I guess we can just sort of get started.
Launch.
Jump right in.
Okay. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for coming out. I'm going to tell you now there are a lot of slides, and I won't go into all of them at great length. The main thing you're going to see is there's a lot of stuff rattling around in my head at all times, although my artwork is actually fairly minimal in terms of the way that I execute them. There are a lot of ideas behind them, and you're going to see some of them. I think I explained to Lauren the other day that I sort of make these talks for me to enjoy, and I hope that you guys do too, because they're along for the ride. Please do feel free to ask questions. You know, I really am open to answering questions about things. I will sort of go on an extended riff about certain slides as I go through. This first slide contains a quote which you've been seeing since you sat here by Borges, whose writing I really enjoy. He's sort of a poet, critical thinker, or was, and I think that he talks a lot about notions of the uncanny and the unworldly, probably in a different way than I'm thinking about them, but I like this quote in particular because it's a quote that Robert Smithson also had in his studio. And the piece behind it is one of my very first light works. This is a quote by a friend of mine, and she just said this to me 2 weeks ago, and it's one of those things where I'm always trying to explain to people what I do, and it's always a little hard. And when she said this, I can't even remember where I made her stop so I could like write it down on my phone, because I'm going to use that. And this is really true. I'm very interested in the ephemeral and light and architecture, space, and science fiction. You'll see a little bit of all of the above. Her name is Katya. She may be able to join us later, I'm not sure. This piece, if you've been through the museum, you know that this piece is practically right outside the door, or that's a section of it. That's part of my reinterpretation of Bearden's The Block. And one of the great things about being an artist is that, as I said, I have a lot of things rattling around in my head, and being a creative person sort of gives you license to explore all of your interests and obsessions, and that is what I do. Lots of free association, I'm just telling you now. So first off, I'm very, very deeply invested in art history. These are some of the many, many, many artists that I look at. Some of these you may recognize. Morandi is on the upper left, Turner in the middle, Via Selman's on the upper right, lower left is Norman Lewis, lower middle is Alma Thomas, and lower right is Mark Rothko. You'll see that I have sort of a turn towards abstraction.
And Kira, what is it, do you think, about abstraction for you?
No, seriously, it's, I think, it's a really good question because I actually trained in representation. I had the classic background drawing painting, very, very classic. And when I teach drawing, which I do a lot of, I teach the classics, draw a sphere, draw from observation. There's something about abstraction that really does call to me. I don't even know what it is. I wish I did, because I do love to draw from observation as well. I mean, I get pure pleasure out of it, as you can probably tell from my drawing out there. I wish I could answer that.
I think that works.
More abstraction. Hessa on the left there, one of my real heroes, and another one is Martin Puryear. If you never seen his work in person, there was that fabulous retrospective of his at MoMA a few years back. One of the best shows I've ever seen in my life. I love his work. This is another interest. It's not all just art history. I like superheroes, especially the ladies, especially, my girl on the left there. You know who that is, right? Storm. Thank you. Grew up with her. Love comic books. Fairy tales and mythology, big deal for me. And there's a lot of critical writing, you know, saying basically that comic books are our new fairy tales and mythology. And of course, science fiction, really big with me. And you can see it's like 1950s era science fiction, gotta love that robot. So this is me, deep down inside where it really counts, that's who I am, Urkel. So those are some of my interests. Another is light. And I am from Southern California, as mentioned earlier. These are some SoCal vistas. And these are some of those light and space artists, mostly based in Southern California, not all. On the upper left is Robert Smithson. Upper right is Maria Nordman. Lower left is Nancy Holt. And lower right is James Turrell. And yes, I am a California girl. Generally that means, you know, Hollywood Squares by Bootsy Collins. I just dated myself. Or, you know, Beach Boys, California girl, not Katy Perry. So if I'm known for anything, I'm mostly known for doing these sort of things. I've been doing these huge wall drawings only for the last couple of years. These are what a lot of people know me for. I do still do them. I work a lot with silver mylar and construction materials. This was done in a gallery in Houston. I do tend to prefer a more raw space, as I was just mentioning to you earlier. I like the juxtaposition of the raw with this ethereal light. I think there's something really wonderful that happens there. But it can work in a clean white space as well.
So these are it's mylar sort of.
Yeah, it's mostly mylar. The inverted pyramid there was a response to the large number of pyramids that I saw all around Houston. Okay. Including in the Contemporary Art Museum, there was the use of pyramids in architecture, and broken obelisk is nearby, right in front of the Rothko Chapel. You know, like seriously, I'm an art history geek, I really am. So the pyramid was a response to that, and as you can see, I was sort of mimicking sunlight breaking dawn with this. And they're almost always very, very large scale, so you can literally walk into them. I'll be doing another one in Los Angeles in the fall, so this has not stopped, it's just that the drawings are in addition to it. This was at PS1, one of my favorite light installations, I have to say. It was called Waterfall. And I named it Waterfall partly because the mylar, and it really is a very simple effect. I learned recently that it's really hard for other people to do this for me. You would think it'd be easy, but Lauren was alluding to the fact earlier, I've actually been dealing with some health issues, so I haven't been available for a lot of things, including a recent show. And some friends of mine were trying to recreate one of my light installations in BC, and finally they just realized that they just couldn't do it. It looks really simple. I think it's simple, but you forget that when you're deeply invested in a practice, what's very, very simple and natural for you is not necessarily for anybody else.
In your head, it's your specific.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. You just forget, you know, you're just like, of course, anybody can do this, but I guess not. The great thing about this one at PS1, Waterfall was partly because it looks like water coming down the stairs. And again, you know, it's a transitional space like that corner that you just saw. But also there was a Pat Stair painting, another abstract piece, that was up as I was doing my tour through PS1 to figure out where I was going to install. And it was called Waterfall, and there was something about that that spoke to me because I actually really do like her paintings. So I named it Waterfall for those reasons. And this piece was originally meant to stay up for, I think, 3 months. It ended up staying up for over a year. It became almost a semi-permanent installation, which was really nice. A lot of people liked that one. And this is Crescendo. This was in Maryland, I think.
Let's say Maryland.
Delaware. No, it was Delaware, actually. Yeah, that was in Delaware, and this is the first time I played with color. I've done a project where I designed a set for a dance company, and I worked with a lighting designer, and he introduced me to the wonderful world of lighting shells, and I thought, this is awesome. And you can do all kinds of things with color. And this, of course, is another view of the piece that you saw at the very beginning, 96 degrees in the shade, the very first of these pure light pieces that I did. I'd worked with Mylar before this as parts of other installations. This was the first time where I just sort of took a leap and made the light the piece. And I remember this was one of those summer shows where it was very spontaneous. A bunch of artists came in, and I immediately saw this crazy structure, because it's not really stairs, it was actually some kind of machinery business. And I'm sitting there looking at it going, please God, don't let anybody take my stairs over there. Nobody else cared.
Where was it?
That's Smack Mouth.
Okay.
So, and it's a little bit of a nod to Robert Smithson, whose work I really like. Talked about that quote being on his studio wall. And if you know Smithson's work, he worked with a lot of raw materials, and he also worked with mirrors. And this was a more recent light installation. This was at Q Art Foundation. We'll circle back to this in a little bit. And there's the details, more details, and in the background you're seeing the very first of one of my wall drawings. And that's what I'm really going to focus on today, is the wall drawings, since that's what I have up here at the museum. It's weird. Who doesn't want to do a huge drawing on a big wall? Like, seriously? Why wouldn't you want to? I really had wanted to for a really long time. Didn't know what I wanted to do. And then I got this opportunity to do a show at Q, and I could have done what people had known me for to date, which is photographs, light installations, a video piece. I did have light and a video piece in it, but I decided that this was where I was going to work out my wall drawing thing. And before I get to that, the reason that I did drawings is because most of my work, or these types of drawings, most of my work was responding to very specific architectural spaces. Mostly transitional spaces, hallways, corners, stairwells. My idea is that I'd like to get people to look at spaces that you would ordinarily either pass by or pass through without actually noticing them. Right, and it really does make you stop and notice a spot that you might not notice otherwise. And of course, doing this, I had to start thinking about architecture more than I had. And then from there, architectural drawings. These are some of the classics when perspective was first invented. So when you're talking architectural drawings, you're really talking perspective, more perspective. My favorite guy ever, this guy, that stuff is amazing.
Really?
Notice the dates there. This was not done with a computer, everybody. It's amazing. Like, anybody with me on this?
Yeah.
Quiet. Like, it's crazy, right?
It's almost unbelievable in a way that was just by hand.
What's that?
MC Escher.
Yes, it looks very Escher-esque, like before Escher. It's really crazy. I love this stuff. And so he's been in my head for a long time. One of the first perspective books I ever had in undergrad, like I still have the same book. It's the Breedem and DeVries. So, doing perspective, all of a sudden, like it's kind of a love-hate thing. Have you guys ever done perspective drawing? You know what I mean, right? Like seriously? Probably freaking mad. So like, you're going crazy. I love this, then a miracle happens. Seriously, that's what I do when I do those drawings out there. It's like, there's math up to a point, and I'm just like, I can't even deal. It's gonna work. But I do like all these tools I use all of this stuff when I'm doing these drawings. You'll see that in a few minutes. So I decided I was going to do this at Q Art Foundation. Huge risk for me because, everybody knows me as the light and space girl. Which I should have a t-shirt made, seriously. But I decided I'm going to work out my issues in public. And not only that, finally I'm going to put the sci-fi obsession that I've had my whole life front and center. It's sort of subtext in a lot of my installations. But 2001 Space Odyssey, I already asked Lauren this, but how many of you have ever watched that movie?
Yes.
From start to finish?
Not the whole thing.
The whole thing?
No,
Like seriously?
not the whole thing.
It's hard, right? Like seriously, it is, but everybody should watch it because it's an amazing, amazing film. It's got these iconic images in it, you know, the dawn of man, right? And this crazy monolith. What the hell is that monolith? I don't know. And then there's the star child at the end. You guys know this image? Yes, no, yeah. And then great, like crazy, and then trippy on the right, like is this guy on LSD? I don't know, but that's what he's seeing. And then at some point, for whatever reason, he ends up in this room that's like from the 18th century. And it looks like that Freedom and DeVries drawing, right? But there's a spaceship in it, and a monolith. Okay, so I had to draw it. There's a star child, and then I love this. Someday you'll understand it. Trust me, you'll never understand it. Even Kubrick says he doesn't understand it. Never said it. So this is the scene that I decided to draw. And you can see the similarities. There's the debris on the right there, right? Like, seriously, I'm convinced that the set designer had to be looking at these drawings, right? And he had to be. So I drew that scene. And these are some details. It was huge. And a bonus for me is that little architectural detail that looks a lot like the monolith. And it's also interesting to me too to flip it and make it a white on black drawing, partly because that room is so starkly white. Even the floor is this glowing white floor, right? And so I'm flipping it, I'm inverting it. That was mind-blowing to do. But later I actually read a really great essay by Arthur Jaffa, the filmmaker. I don't know if you know him. He and Greg Tate have been buddies forever. They're both into science fiction. He writes a lot about, like at great length, about his first experiencing 2001 Space Odyssey and this trope of whiteness. And so, like I read this weirdly enough almost a year after I'd made this piece, but I thought, I completely inverted and I made it a trope of blackness, basically. Wasn't thinking that, but that's what I did.
And how was the experience sort of installing this?
It was like
working in it the first time?
Oh my God, it was intense in so many different ways. Well, for me, there were a couple things. One was I had to hire assistants for the first time to do more than just, help to frame or set things up. They were actually, they had to come with skills.
Okay.
And not only skills, but they had to feel comfortable. I learned as a result of that experience to tell all assistants in the future right off the bat, don't worry about it, it'll be okay. It's just chalk. It can be erased if you can make a mistake. Because the people that helped me, and let's see, I'll flip. This is us working on it. They were all super quiet at the beginning of it, right? And after a few days, no, actually it wasn't until the end of it, they told me that one of the reasons, they didn't know each other, but they also told me that one of the reasons that they were so quiet at the beginning is they were terrified. They were like, seriously, they were so scared they were going to screw it up. There's this huge wall. Yeah, you have a question?
And the photograph before, did you install that partial wall, or was that there?
No, that was actually there. It was a very happy coincidence for me. I was like, yes, perfect. Like I'm always responding to very specific spaces, and that's one of the things that I like the way that this piece exists, it will never look like that again. There's the woman that I quoted earlier. Katya, I used your quote that I made you stop and let it write down. Nothing like putting on the spot when you walk in, right?
Hi, everybody.
But no, seriously, this didn't exist before, and I'm sure that at some point somebody's probably going to ask me to do this again, and I would be happy to do it, but it'll never look like this again. And of course, what I have here, it'll never look like that again, ever. Like, I love what it does here, but then if I ever do a similar thing to that somewhere else, it won't look like it does here. And I'll probably do something somewhere else that I also love, but it will be its own thing. And I really do like that kind of spontaneity and reacting and responding to a very specific situation. That's sort of where I live and breathe as an artist, to tell you the truth. Like and it's kind of crazy because like there's nothing for me to sell. Galleries don't love me. I mostly show museums, seriously. I show museums and nonprofit spaces, mostly museums. I have a weird career. Like very little commercial gallery, lots of museums. Just the way it is. So as you can see, there's drawing, and more drawing. And you come away full of chalk. And drawing. This gives you an idea of the scale of it. Like I said, my poor assistants, they were all terrified. They were all pretty much fresh out of art school and scared half to death.
And no computer?
We projected some of it. This actually, now that you asked that question, this is the piece that we projected the most on. I have not used the projector as much on any of the wall drawings since, weirdly enough. Maybe it's just getting more comfortable with it, but they come more quickly. But I also know better what to tell my assistants and how to direct them. Like one of the things with my assistants is I tell them that they're not just warm bodies, they're actually going to be asked to make decisions, which is very rare for assistants to be told, and they usually don't believe me until I'm like, okay, you really need to decide something here. And the assistants this last go around, so lovely. Two of them took me aside privately to tell me this was one of the best working experiences they've ever had with an audience, and I took that as a huge compliment.
Yeah.
Because I'm very low-key. I didn't even freak out when the kid rubbed himself all over my drawing. I'll tell you guys about that later. Seriously, he did. I wish I had a picture. I really do. I didn't get to see it. I'm so bummed. So it looks like you can walk into this thing. And by the way, that's not actually chalk. It's pastel. That's why the line is so thick and rich. It's very, very thick. Very striking. If I used actual chalk, it would be a much thinner line. It wouldn't be nearly as expressive. And it's really weird because it's all done with, straight lines, straight edges, rulers, protractors, compasses. So it's very mathematical. But because it's pastel, it still has this expressive quality to the line, even though the lines are meant to be very rigid. So there's this weird tension that I kind of like for some reason. And as I said, go back to your question about abstraction, clearly I like representation too. So I'm just a little confused. So, and that chair is really funny. It's not there anymore, but when you're standing next to it, it looks like you could pull it up and sit in it. It's very weird. So one of the first things that I thought was, oh my God, I wish I had done this at Studio Museum. Seriously, I cannot tell you. I was just sitting there, and I was so happy when Lowry came by to see it, because she was the former director of the Studio Museum. So I was just like, oh good, at least somebody from the Studio Museum got to see it, because it should have been at the Studio Museum. But I wasn't there yet. The other piece that was in this show was the Prisoner Lens. This title is actually from the first chapter of Samuel Delaney's Dahlgren. I don't know how many of you know Samuel Delaney or his work. He's the guy.
Maybe give us a little background.
Yeah. A little background?
I know you could.
You're treading on dangerous territory. Okay, so Delaney is awesome. First of all, now he's a science fiction writer, he's also a critical theorist. That really is what he looks like. What's really funny, if you find very old pictures of him, which I have, he was gorgeous when he was young. He was brought up here in Harlem. He lives here in New York now, and he teaches a lot. Incredibly generous guy, writes fiction, writes nonfiction, writes about writing, is a mentor to a million people. There are a million of us who love him beyond all reason. And now he went through a period where he looked like, okay, again, dating myself, looked like ZZ Top. You know what I'm talking about? He looked like ZZ Top for a while. Now he looks like Santa Claus. He's getting older, but he's so sharp. So brilliant. Dahlgren is pretty much considered his masterpiece. Like 2001 Space Odyssey, almost impossible, seriously. but really, really worth reading. And I think you were saying that there's some kind of
There's a huge, this year, it's a huge celebration, either a birthday or just honoring him in sort of his
Right.
career and his work. So I think in the latter part of the year, all over the country,
Yeah.
there are going to be different.
That makes
things going on.
sense, because there's also a film, I forgot to say this earlier, you know the film?
Yeah.
The film is, The Polymath is the film. It's about Delaney. The other thing about him is he was openly gay way before it was a thing to do. But he was married to a woman, lived in the village, had all these adventures, had a lot of sexual adventures, and if you ever read his autobiography, you'll get to read about them. So The Polymath explores some of that. So he talks a lot about identity in terms of race, gender, and sexual orientation, but he talks about it in such a thoughtful way. For me, I would say that his critical writing is probably even more formative for me than his science fiction, but he's just like seriously Delaney love. And I've been following him for about 15 or 20 years, and it seems like there's just this momentum building, sort of like with the visual artist Charles Gaines. Like, a lot of people didn't know who he was for a while. He'd been working forever. He was one of my professors and mentors at CalArts, and like now he's everywhere, and everyone just is like, oh my God, Charles Gaines. And it seems like that's happening with
Very
Delaney
similar, yeah.
as well. But if you don't know Delaney, you should. That's just, if nothing else, when you leave here, go find some Delaney to read. If you Google him, you'll find some articles online. Seriously, I could go on about him for a while, but I'm gonna stop now. What time is it? Am I going over yet? Okay. I told you I have a lot of images. I can talk for a really long time. It's a little embarrassing. And by the way, I'm not feeling well, so just imagine if I were well. You guys would be trapped here forever. So this is another project that I did in LA. It was called How Many Billboards? There were a bunch of artists who showed. This is Mack Center for Art and Architecture, which is an incredible institution. And there were about 30 artists invited to design billboards that were all over Los Angeles, and this was my billboard. I know you know what that image is. Did anybody else know what that image is?
The Watchtower.
Yes, my people. Okay, so Watts Towers, there it is. I grew up in LA, so I grew up with these as part of, you know, the sort of cultural background. I didn't live near them, but, you know, they're the Watts Towers. And I don't know how many of you know the story, but this fellow, there he is, Simon Rodia, who's an Italian immigrant. He was like 5'0". And he built all of this without any power tools of any kind, with no scaffolding, no lifts, nothing. He would just climb the towers and just build them higher and higher and higher, just because. And this is how they look now. They're inlaid with all kinds of ceramics and broken bottles and everything. And Lauren, you just saw them.
Yeah, we
You
went,
talk about them for a minute.
we took a cultural trip out to LA, and we went to the Watts Towers, and they were gorgeous. I mean, having seen the images always, and sort of knowing the story, but actually going there, we also watched a little video about making of them. Naima, remember the video? Yeah. And but to see them and just sort of be able to walk in and like look up and just, it was gorgeous. And I love LA. It was my first time there, but everyone should go, and everyone should go there.
Yeah, and you were, like what you said earlier was so true. It's just like the pictures don't begin to do it justice. It's like you have to see them in person to really get how amazing they are. And the story too is that like once he built them, it took him decades to finish them. He just was kind of done, and he left. He gave the keys to the property to some dude and said, okay, I'm leaving them here, you know, you take care of them, I'm out. And he left for Northern California. And the whole art scene has built up around these towers. So it's an incredibly important institution. It's very beleaguered now. especially since the economic crisis. It's been tough, so I thought that my billboard should address this. Here's some more details, and obviously my billboard there, and that's what the billboard looked like in Culver City. I've never done a billboard before, and quite frankly, just like drawing on a really big wall, who wouldn't want to do a billboard? That was awesome. And then this is another wall installation. Oh yeah, this was a love affair, is a love affair ongoing that I have with a particular building. I think you've got to hear this spiel. Katya, I think you've heard me talk about my building. I am in love with the Bradbury building in LA. That is a quick peek at the drawing that came out of it. I don't know if you are aware of the Bradbury building. You're about to get a whole education. Just you wait. That is the Bradbury building. It's so not interesting from the outside, right? Who cares? Really plain. But it really is the most famous building in science fiction. It's used in sci-fi movies a lot. It's not anything to do with Ray Bradbury, by the way, just to be clear. Although I heart Ray Bradbury too. There's the building again, very dull, very plain. There's the entrance, and that's what it looks like on the inside. I know, right? It is so beautiful. It is like one of the most beautiful buildings, and I first visited this building when I was probably like 8 years old. And I fell instantly in love with the building and have been in love with it, honest to God, ever since. Unfortunately nowadays you can't, I was telling Lauren earlier, you can't visit all the floors because of all things. This building now houses LAPD's Internal Affairs Department. I know. It just pisses me off, frankly. Sorry, that got recorded, didn't it? Oops. But seriously, you can only go into the ground floor and look up. You used to be able to ride the elevators. The elevators are cast iron, very old school, and they run, I don't even know how to describe it to you, except that once in my entire life, for I can't even remember what reason, I got a chance to ride in somebody's Rolls Royce, and it was amazing. Like, there's something about a machine that is so impeccably well made that you can feel it in every piece of that machine. That's what riding in these elevators is like. I couldn't believe they wouldn't let me get on an elevator. So Bradbury to me is a little bit like a jewel box, kind of plain on the outside, and you open it up and it's like beautiful stuff inside. Jewel box is also the name of a star nebula. How cool is that? So, I told you, I just keep going back to that sci-fi thing. And the building also has this crazy backstory. This is the education part. I was just telling this to a curator in LA who should know it. He works at Muppet. He doesn't have a Bradbury building story yet. Like, seriously? Anyway, so Louis Bradbury, he's like a millionaire. It's industrial age, right? It's the 1800s. And he's got to get a big building name after, think Donald Trump and his buildings, right? He's got to have a building that's got his name on it. It's got to be the most amazing, fabulous building. And nobody was making the building that was good enough for him. So he goes to all these different architects, and he's finally in the Sumner Hunt's office. And there's some kid, draftsman, who's got like this scribble, George Wyman, right? He's got a scribble on his desk, and Bradbury sees it. This is the story, anyway. And Bradbury says, you know what, I like your drawings. Can you turn out a draft of a building for me? And George Wyman actually wasn't trained fully as an architect. He's just a grunt working in this big architectural firm. And his drawings actually were inspired, here we go again, time travel utopian novel. Seriously, you can't get away from the sci-fi. This is the book. You can tell it's the 1800s by this mustache, right? It's really, really hard to read because it's written like it was written in the 1800s. It's like, the language is so stilted. But the ideas are very interesting. It's just after the Civil War, what would a perfect utopian world be like, and all this sort of thing. And in it, at one point he describes what a perfect commercial building would be, which it would have an interior courtyard, it would have plants, the sun would be streaming through, there would be a pedestrian sort of area where people would be comfortable and happy and all that sort of thing. So, you know, this is Wyman's sketch. Okay, now this was, you know, Wyman's like, I'm not so sure about this. But this is during the spiritualist movement too. So, you guys know about the spiritualist movement in the Americas? The Transcendentalists and the Ouija board. So you know what Wyman went and did, right? Ouija board. That's how he decides. He's going to contact the spirit world, and that's going to help him make his decision. So, I told you, it's a great story. There's a lot of stuff rattling around in my head, I told you. So this is his brother's advice. Take the Bradbury, it will make you famous. So Mark Wyman had died, like, you know, years ago, rather. So finally it's completed in 1893, and if I remember correctly, I think Bradbury himself might have been dead by the time it was finished. But you can see that it's just an incredibly, incredibly beautiful building. So more interiors, and it looks a lot like the old Penn Station that everyone in New York still mourns, but it was actually completed a decade before Penn Station, which I think is really interesting. And if you go to Europe, of course, you see lots of buildings like this, but just a great story. So it's used a lot in sci-fi, like Blade Runner, gotta love it. There's the scene in Blade Runner that I recreated, that was the piece that you saw earlier. Or from Blade Runner, and it was used in a comic book. So you keep circling back to the same things, and of course I like to show it in progress because I think it's really interesting to see what goes into making these things. And as you can see, I'm really trying for life scale here, because I like that sort of disorienting effect that you could almost walk into these things.
Yeah.
The other thing you'll probably have noticed is that most of these drawings have all been interiors. The one outside is actually all exterior, so that was a real different thing for me. And there it is again. And there's another. This was actually in the corner. It's hard to see it from here, but it was a very disorienting thing. It felt like you could walk up the corner and out of the room. Unfortunately, like again, with these installations, you really can't recreate them in photographs, no matter how well you photograph them. You sort of have to be there for them.
Experiences.
And that's the entrance, and that's me. So, like, it's weird. It looks like I'm really standing on the step, doesn't it? And leaning on the post. So I'm like totally faking it. But it works. And then these are some projects in process. I have not realized these yet, and there is a reason for referring to these. I got a grant from Art Matters, and I was traveling this summer. Corbusier is on the left, Gaudi's Sagrada Familia is on the right, more Corbusier. I went to go see see Notre Dame in Ronchamp this summer. This is an interior. You can see my interests remain really consistent. This is another thing. If you ever get a chance, there's nothing else in Ronchamp. I'm going to tell you now. There is nothing there. Really great bed and breakfast that I stayed at, but there is nothing in Ronchamp. But this.
Worth the trip.
But it is so worth the trip. It is like, again, pictures don't begin to do it justice because it's not just about the light. They actually ask that you be silent when you're in there. So it reminds me a lot of being in a Buddhist monastery when you're on silent retreat. I was there literally for, I don't know, 5 hours, 6 hours or something. Most people didn't stay as long as I did, but there's something about the silence in this environment where the light is all natural light, so it's actually not even as bright as these pictures up here. The photographer obviously just had a very long exposure, and you have these sort of pinpoints of light. It's beautiful. I also went to see Gaudi's buildings in Barcelona, completely different, where Corbusier is a minimalist, he's a maximalist, obviously. There's Sagrada Familia, and that's what I was going to visit. And I'm gonna jump from there to the block, and there's a tie-in, I swear. I just circle back, I really do. So that's the piece again, and I was in Barcelona when I received Lauren's email inviting me to do a project, and I'm there to see Sagrada Familia, that's the interior, and I get this email from Lauren, and of course I'm gonna do it. It's Romare Bearden, it's Studio Museum in Harlem. I know exactly that I'm gonna do a wall drawing, you know. I almost knew instantly it was gonna be the block, honestly.
Yeah, you came, you were ready.
Yeah, I knew, like almost as soon as I saw your email, I'm like, I'm gonna do the block. But while I was there, I'd seen, I went to the Picasso Museum, which ended up being a real highlight of the trip for me. And this is a terrible thing to say as an artist, but you know, you feel like you know an artist, right? Like, I know Picasso, and like, whatever. But this painting that he did, or painting series, was Las Meninas, where he took Velázquez's Las Meninas, which is this painting, and he reinterpreted it for over a year, year and a half, 2 years. Made something like 50, 60 paintings from it, and believe it or not, that really is his reinterpretation. Here's a more direct, I think it's easier to see. And here, and all of a sudden, like, I was in love with Picasso again, because he took all this time, and I think he just did it because he felt like it, and he was curious, and he was interested, and he wanted to understand what Velázquez was doing, but he wasn't trying to do Velázquez. He's trying to interpret Velázquez in his own language. And I really respect that kind of investigation. So that was really exciting. And this is, of course, the point where I get the email from Lauren. And as was mentioned earlier, this has been like my home away from home for a really long time. It's almost embarrassing. And the Bearden Project, of course, is an amazing show, and the second leg of it is open as of now. And you know, the Studio Museum. I'm just going to segue into Studio Museum for a minute. But Studio Museum has a really interesting relationship with artists, because I don't know any other museum that does what you do with artists, which is Studio Museum actually has relationships with artists that sometimes go on for years. I mean, in my case, it's 10 years and counting, right?
And I think for us, it has a large part to do with because artists were so involved with our founding, and sort of without the artists like Bearden and a generation that worked with the supporters and donors to give us this museum to start it, we wouldn't be here. So I think that is sort of a huge part of what we do, and built in with the residency program and residency program, where you see people as they're sort of just beginning and starting their careers, and then you keep following them, and you keep wanting, we always want everyone to come back. It's one of those things where I'm sure we get annoying, sort of, you know, like, so Kira, what are you doing now? You know, it's just us maintaining these relationships that are so ingrained in who we are.
No, it's funny you say that, because there was a time there where, like, literally I was doing a project every single year with you guys, like for 5 or 6 years straight. It was just kind of like, oh God, everybody's gonna think I only do things with studios and nowhere else. I mean, which isn't a bad thing, but it was just like, okay. But I think the other thing that it does for us as artists is that we become a family of artists as well, because a lot of us end up having, you know, long relationships with each other, where we talk about art, we show together, not only here, but in other places. So it's just a really unusual dynamic, I think. And it's, I think, very rewarding. Like whenever I come to Studio Museum, I swear I feel like I'm coming home. It's just like, oh, it's home. I'm doing something at home. It helps that I live in Harlem too. It's just like, I can just walk here. And it also, you know, go back to your project, Bearden was the first African-American artist I ever heard of. I was an undergrad, I remember I was looking, and it was very hard. And I was in a studio, one of the studio classrooms, and I found some old art news or Art in American, and flipping through it, and all of a sudden I come across this picture of Bearden, and he was the first one I'd ever heard of. So that was like, for me, that was sort of coming full circle. At the same time, I'd also been looking for examples of women artists, and those were a little easier to come by. Because of people like Mary Cassatt and the Impressionists, very popular, and of course Georgia O'Keeffe, incredibly popular. Gotta love those things, right? They're beautiful. Did you guys check the O'Keeffe show when I was here a couple of years ago? It's amazing. I brought a friend here, Sager. He blushed like crazy. Like, you can see why, right? Just saying. I love this picture of her. Going back to the block again. And Bearden, I really just searched all over to find pictures of him. He's such a serious guy. Look at him.
So
love
focused.
There he is. I love that picture of him. It's cute, right? Yeah, with the cat. And he was born in Charlotte and then moved here. And he grew up here during the Harlem Renaissance. So he also has a long history in Harlem, like Delaney. Longer, than mine. Mine is only a decade. These are some of the art figures of the time. You guys probably recognize Jacob Lawrence on the upper left, Augustus Savage on the upper right. Lower right is Aaron Douglas, and lower left, Archibald Motley. These are some of the people that he just grew up knowing and seeing their work, and later on he was doing his own thing, and very much, celebrating Black life and culture. More Bearden, and all this was going on too. So he ends up helping to found the Studio Museum with his cat. His cat too. I love and then of course I have my own history with the Studio Museum. I actually was in freestyle, which is crazy. The inaugural exhibit for Lowry and Bellona when they came in, and I'm behind the kicking ass there. That really was the name of the piece, by the way, Eric Wesley's piece, and the photographs behind him. And then, doing the drawing, it gave me my wish. 10 years after my residency, that's us in residence. Adia Millette on the left, Kehinde Wiley in the middle, and me on the right, when my hair was still in an afro. And that is, again, the project of the year. This was one of them, Harlem World, the big architecture show. That was a great show here, I thought. Really exciting show. That's a picture that I took standing up on the platform at Metro North 125. And then there's a project that I did for the magazine with Brian Keith Jackson. So this is just to show I have a long history here. So it was really great to be able to do this. And I didn't even realize until I was drawing that it was exactly 10 years after my residency. So, the block, it's iconic, it's Bearden. I had never seen it in person before, by the way. I'd only seen it in reproduction until this year when they had it at the Met. And if you haven't seen it at the Met, I think it's still up.
I think it's down. I think it came down.
Did it finally come down? Oh, it was so worth seeing. Talk about a jewel. It was really, really, really beautiful. The colors here are so pale compared to the color. But what an incredible artwork. And of course, situated, the place that he's depicting is not terribly far from here. It's like 130 something Lenox, right? So, and he's showing all these different aspects of Harlem life. And I love the way that he's playing with scale and perspective here. Just really wonderfully, and just a few quick things. I actually took these pictures from the book that was based on the block with poems by Langston Hughes, because it was a really good reproduction. And those were the pictures that I used for my piece. This piece, of course, is just outside the door. This actually does not appear anywhere in the block, but I got my sci-fi thing happening, so that's why that's there. And obviously the street corner you just saw, and you can see that I'm playing with perspective here. If you're in there, one of those guys is on one wall, the other guy is on the other, so they're sort of facing one another. There's another perspective thing that I do with the angel in the opposite corner, but just a side-by-side comparison. And you can see, one of the other things that I'm thinking about here too is very much like what Picasso was doing with Velázquez. I felt like I was doing a similar thing with Bearden, which is breaking it down and analyzing it and reinterpreting it in my language. And in some ways, seeing what Picasso did with the Velázquez almost gave me permission to investigate another artist's work. It's not usually part of my practice. So it was nice to do that. And also to make it over into a different language. The other thing that I like about this is that with Bearden, his color is so beautiful that you're really seduced by the color, and you don't often notice how strong his composition is and how strong the structure is. But the structure and the composition are really, really strong, and as you can see, you know, granted I changed a few things around and I really stripped it down, but it holds up without the color, which is really interesting. Like you wouldn't think, but like he really was strong on so many different levels. And much like seeing the Picasso show, investigating Bearden in this way gave me a new appreciation for just how interesting and complex his work is. Because it's so, what's interesting about Bearden is like, his work is so appealing and so accessible that you forget that it's also very complex and very, very sophisticated. That's a real genius to be able to be all those things at the same time.
To have the feel.
Yeah.
The levels of it.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like seriously, I was just like loving on Bearden while I was doing this. So a couple more details, and again, I like just playing around with scale. This is another thing that made me think not of Picasso's investigating Meninas, but made me think of Picasso himself, that Bearden must have had a dialogue in his head with Picasso, because you know the way Picasso plays around with scale. Oh, and then of course I had to do the cats. There are no cats in the block, by the way. So I decided, in fact, you're responsible for the cats. She said it. Because I didn't have cats in, and it was like, but he had cats. I'm like, okay. So I asked one of my assistants, Valerie, she drew her cat, that's the fuzzy cat on the right, and then I got jealous. So I had to draw my cat, and my cat's over there. So, back to Bearden's cats. And then all the stars in and outside of the windows, nowhere in the original. Again, that's going back to my sci-fi thing, this idea of space sort of going in and outside of, you know, physical space, outer space going in and outside of a domestic space. I thought was really interesting. And again, you can see some progress, works in progress. Oh, and then I became really obsessed with this light bulb. And I'm convinced that Bearden was thinking of the light bulb in Guernica because they look very similar. And that light bulb is so huge and oversized and crazy. And you'll notice it's one of the first things that you see when you walk down the stairs into that exhibit. So there's his light bulb, there's mine, and of course always installation shots. The funny thing is that I hadn't met my assistants before this, but there was a young man and two young women. And what's really weird is the two young ladies looked like they were related to me. Like seriously, with the hair and all, like they could have been my relatives. As you see, it gets really casual. I'm wearing the same boots right now. Interesting. So, you know, lots and lots of work, and see, she could be my relative, right? Isn't that crazy? Like, I didn't know that until, you know, in fact, I didn't even notice it until I saw the pictures.
So you're looking at,
Yeah, I looked at the pictures, like, oh my God. And that's it.
That's really good.
I think before we sort of open it up to questions, I think I know I have a question. In thinking about your site, how everything is so site specific, you're talking about how looking at Picasso, it sort of gave you this space to investigate Bearden in a way, but I also think it definitely relates back to the site specificity of your work, just because since the block is so, it's Harlem, and just
Yeah.
the relationship that you've had with this institution
Right.
and that Bearden's had with this institution, I think it's very also sort of based on how when you were in Texas, you were very much looking at the shapes
Yeah.
around, and
Yeah.
so I think it all sort of comes, I guess that really isn't a question,
But
but yeah.
no, it's true. It's Harlem on Harlem and Harlem, like layers of Harlem, right? It's very true. Because I lived in Harlem almost ever since I moved to New York City. Like I sort of couch surfed for 3 months before I found my first apartment here. But I've been in Harlem ever since. In fact, I originally thought I would be moving to Brooklyn because that's where all my artist friends were moving. But the rent was cheaper in Harlem, and Harlem was on the cusp of starting to change over. It hadn't quite yet. People thought I was crazy to be moving here, by the way.
Even 10 years ago, it was still a.
It was, oh yeah. No, I have to tell you, no, you.
I just like the New Yorker in me is like, you could live in Harlem. It's all like there.
I'll never forget, like, I was having my phone installed in my first apartment. It was actually more like 12 years ago, right? And the phone guy comes, I've just moved in, and I'm so clearly not from New York. Apparently, you can still tell, I've been told. But the phone guy comes in, and she's like, oh, you just getting here? I'm like, yeah, I just moved here. Where are you from? California. Where in California? Inglewood. Inglewood? You went from Inglewood to Harlem? From Inglewood to Harlem? No, he said it like 3 times. And then he goes, Inglewood, up to no good, Dr. Dre. And I'm like, okay. It's like, seriously,
It's like, welcome to Harlem.
I know, it's like, yeah, it was like, welcome to Harlem. I was like, okay, I'm here. That's wild. But yeah, I love living here. I really do. And as people who've known me for a really long time know, I really have loved it since moving to where I now live. I live in Petit Senegal. So every time I go home, I'm going home to West Africa in Harlem, which I really like. But,
I guess now, questions?
yes.
You.
Anyway, I'll let you call on people.
I had a question. I wanted to know how hard, or has it been hard, not to find a way to be commercial within what you love about installation work? Like, have you ever felt like maybe a comparison of people that you were peers with in school or
Right.
in the community that have been successful in doing more gallery as well as maybe museum work, and had not a crisis, but a thought of like almost like sliding doors with Paltrow, like if I made a chalk drawing that could be mounted versus on a wall. Has that been an issue, or how do you resolve that?
There were times, I think, when I felt a little bit more conflicted about it, where I was just like, oh, I should probably make more commercial work. But, I mean, it's sort of a layered answer, if you'll bear with me. One of the things is I've really come to believe that as an artist, the work sort of tells you what you're doing, rather than, you're not really in the driver's seat. The art sort of tells you. And my practice is what it is. If I try to force it to be something else, I think it would not be a good thing, honestly. But that realization took a long time to come to, frankly. The other thing is that I have taught for a very long time. I teach now. I actually really like teaching, weirdly enough, and it gives me enough of an income. It hasn't always, but at this point, it gives me enough of an income that I'm not dependent on gallery sales or commissions or honoraria for my income. God knows I'm always happy to get them and get them, and this is not to say I don't need them or want them. However, I'm not dependent on them solely. And that gives me a lot of freedom. The third thing is, like, having taught forever, there were times when I really felt like, oh, I should do like some of my artist friends, I shouldn't have a regular teaching gig. I teach part-time at 2 different places and have done for a long time. And I thought, oh, I should drop those. I should, just try to make a go of it as an artist, because I could see, peers' careers getting bigger. But the truth is, once the economic crash hit, I was so thankful I kept those jobs, because so many people now who have had bigger careers would kill for my teaching gigs these days. It's weird too, because in Los Angeles, there's much more respect for artists who teach than there is here in New York. New York, there's still that notion. I think it's because the commercial gallery scene is such a driver of the art scene, that there's still that notion of, like, if you're not making a living on just your art, you're not really an artist. And it's so not about growing up in Los Angeles. Like, that's not, I mean, everybody just assumes that of course you're gonna teach if you can. You know, it's just I mean, you were just in it, you probably picked up on it. It's a really different feeling, right? Like, you know, there it's just like, of course you teach, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so, I mean, there have been times when I felt more like that. I think part of it, you know, quite frankly, dating myself again, you know, getting older, more comfortable with myself, my practice, who I am as a human being. I'm kind of okay, you know, I really like making the work that I do. At this point, I know that it's something, you know, people are going to ask me to do more things, maybe not every 5 minutes, but weirdly enough, I'm not showing super frequently, but I noticed that the quality of exhibits that I'm doing and who I'm showing with has been really good lately. Like, this piece, obviously, is an amazing venue. Like, so many people are picking up on this piece with you. I can't even tell you. I hear about it all the time. I'm just like, okay, can I go hide now? And then when I did the Bradbury Building drawing at Griffin Gallery, I was showing directly across from James Turrell. You know, it's just like Maya Lin was in the same show, Karen Sander. I mean, like, these are the big names in art history books. The Billboard show is the same thing. Like Renee Green, Daniel J. Martinez, Alan Sekulo, like, I mean, we're talking the heavyweights. I have a show coming up I'm not really at liberty to talk too much about, but a show coming up in LA where it's a very similar sort of thing, where like the caliber of the artist whose company I keep is going up and up and up. So I think, you know, I sort of come to a good balance. Now, you know, 5 years from now, I might feel completely differently. I don't know. Because, you know, the art thing is like this. It's seriously, like, how many of you are artists, by the way? And, like, buckle up, man. That's all I gotta say. Seriously, because it's just, like, a lot of times, especially when you're first starting off, you think the trajectory is just going to be like one steady, you know, I just work hard enough and it's just going to go up and up. It is more of a roller coaster. It really is. I mentioned Charles Gaines earlier. Amazing, amazing artist. So well respected. As he puts it, for 20 years he couldn't pay people to pick up his work. Now people are demanding his work and he can't make work fast enough. So, and he's, what, 60-something now. So just, it's a long, you know, I remember interviewing David Hammons once, and he said to me, as an artist, you have to have the strategy of the long-distance runner, you know, not the sprinter. You've got to be in it for the marathon. And I think that that's really true. Like, you know, when you see people who seem to be shooting towards success, you kind of have to tune it out a little bit, because what's successful for them may be very short-lived, or it just may not be a good fit for you. Like, every artist has a very different kind of success. Really different paths. Really, really different. That was a long answer.
It's a good answer, though. Thank you.
You're welcome. I told you I can talk for a really long time.
Are there any other questions?
You were talking earlier about projection, using projections, and I didn't quite understand what was meant by that. Does that mean doing something in miniature and shooting it so it would look like this on the wall, or something else?
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I mean. And you know what's weird? It's like I don't use them hardly at all anymore. Remember you brought down computers for us? Did you notice that we had them on for like a minute?
I was wondering if you
were
would
done.
actually use them.
Yeah, we use them for half a day. Like, I prepare the images And it's a long process getting the images to this, so I get to an approximation of this using drawing and Photoshop, right? And then I'll print out a lot of copies, maybe project, but I'm finding that more and more I'm sort of leaving the projector aside, or I just use the projector for very specific areas.
So you don't use the projector to play off this?
No, what you're doing is like to keep everything in scale.
Oh, so it's
You're
just like
using a
it's like an
projector.
etch-a-sketch kind of project, so you draw it out and it shoots it and you trace it, is that what
To
that?
some extent, but what's really weird about perspective drawing is most of the time it doesn't work to simply blow up an accurate perspective drawing from small to big, because the perception is so different when you work at a bigger scale that you actually have to tweak it a lot. That's what I meant by throwing out the math at a certain point, because even doing the math, like, it doesn't work when you change scales that extremely. Like, you literally do have to just throw the math aside, which was really crazy in LA. I had this one assistant who was a little OCD, and he really, really, really wanted to do the math, and I was like, dude, we gotta kick the math to the curb. Oh my God, I thought his head was gonna explode. Poor guy. Any other questions? It's cold in here.
You talked about free association and abstraction as something that moves you. Do you have a central pull now as to where you're going?
Somebody, I wish I could find this quote. I was thinking about this earlier. Somebody said once that most artists basically have one great idea, and if they're lucky, that idea goes in a lot of different directions. Honestly, my thing really is the light and space thing, light space architecture. It just tends to take a lot of different forms. So, right now I'm continuing with wall drawings. I'll be doing a light installation in LA. But continue along these lines. But there's going to be something that'll happen. I'll go, oh gee, I really need to do this other thing. But it will almost certainly go back, if you scratch away at the surface of what it looks like, it's almost always going to be this light space perception thing with a little bit of science fiction thrown in. And ephemeral generally. I really have a thing about, for whatever reason, I just seem to be very drawn to making ephemeral objects and experiences that go away over time, that only exist for a finite period of time. I don't know what it is about that. I wish, sometimes I think, God, it really would be nice to make something a little bit more object-y and sell it. But really, that's where I live. So, there it is. Yes?
Has anyone ever commissioned your work for their home?
It's come really close a couple times. I suspect that what's going to finally happen is one person will finally bite the bullet, and then once one person does, others will follow. I've had 2 people come very, very close to commissioning me for a light piece or a drawing. Just that close, and then it didn't quite happen. I suspect it'll eventually happen, because who wouldn't want
I do
it?
too. I was thinking when you keep saying the commercial, I'm like, who wouldn't want this in their home?
I know,
The other
right?
piece called Prism, I turned to my friend and I said, if I get that thing $1 million.
I'm so glad to hear. Well, you called me.
Have you ever used you say space and light architecture? Have you ever done any pieces outside?
I have done some things outside. I didn't bring any of the photographs, but I did some things outdoors at Art Romare. That was really fun. I built this structure out of tree trunks, like young tree trunks, and I silver leafed them. It was really pretty. And yeah, it was really beautiful. And it was really funny because you could walk into it, and they had an open house, and it was really weird. You'd watch these families walking down, and the kids would like pull each other and they'd walk right away from their parents over to this thing. It was hilarious. I felt like the Pied Pipers.
Yes.
You mentioned when you were introduced to color with your light projects, have you thought of doing your drawings with any color? The contrast with the black and white is beautiful, but have you thought?
You know, I haven't yet. At some point they'll probably, you would swear I hated color, wouldn't you? I really love color, believe it or not. Like, I hate the fact that right now my apartments all have white. My apartment has all white walls. It's driving me crazy. There may be color on walls at some point, but it has to be the right thing for it. I think here would not have been right just because, like I said, Bearden's so amazing with color. I'm not trying to do Bearden, but interpret him in a different way. But there's probably going to be a project at some point where it really will need to be color. And actually that goes back, Lauren, you were asking me earlier about why the chalk or the pastel, and it kind of goes to your question too. It's like my first experience with color were with pastels. I love pastels. I mean, but nobody uses pastels, but they're wonderful. It's just like pure pigment. They're awesome. And if you ever go to an art store, they actually sell raw pigments, and that is so amazing. I get really happy in art stores. And building supply stores, it's a thing. Tools of the trade, exactly. Oh, are you laughing because you go the same way?
Well, the funny thing is, I was saying it's like office supplies for me.
Yeah. We all have a thing, don't we?
I really enjoy this, but I'm a very math, Excel, spreadsheets kind of person.
Oh, how funny.
But-
Yeah, we all have our things.
Right, that likes looking at pictures. So I guess one of the questions I would have had, well, I guess we can ask you now since we're talking is. Okay, so speaking to a person who likes office supplies and math, how do you get from thinking about one of your, I think it was Mylar installations, to having it happen?
Oh.
Like, I mean, I look at it and it's like, it's stand and you can look at it, it's gorgeous, but I don't understand.
How did I
the
get
thought
there, huh?
to the big scale thing.
Usually, yeah, that's a good question. Jeez Louise.
You're welcome.
How do I do those?
Do you play?
I do play with them, yeah. And sometimes I will actually make maquettes or models. I have a couple at home now. I had to destroy a couple when I moved just because they were in bad shape and I was trying to move. But oftentimes I'll do the models not necessarily for me because, I have this, just because I work with space so much that I can conceptualize 3D space really, really well, but it took me a while to realize that that's not something everybody does. It's like, who can't look at a room and figure out how big it is? I don't understand. But it's a weird ability, but it's because that's what I do, right? So I've made these models, and sometimes that can be helpful, but for me, it's mostly I need to just sort of sit and be in a space for a while and figure out what's going to work, how the light will play against the wall, what shapes are going to work, what's going to draw one's eye. And oftentimes, one of the things that, this is going to sound terrible, but like, very controlling, but I like sort of destabilizing your perception, where things get just a little wonky when you're walking up to it and it's a little sort of confusing. You see a little bit of that in this drawing out here, particularly the angel in the coffin in that one corner where there's a weird perspective thing that happens, but I do that a lot with the Mylar as well, where the edges will seem to disappear or it'll be hard to see up and down. And I like to play around with things like that. So it's usually very much created on the spot, so it's kind of hard to say how do you do it, because I don't sort of plan it first and then look for the spot. I find the spot first and then plan it based on the spot.
If you plan it based on the spot, it's such a large installation though. You have to decide before you start what you want to see as a finished product, or you kind of start with an idea and then see what looks out.
That's a good question, because you know what I found out is if I plan it out too much, it kills it. It really does, even with these drawings. Like, if I plan out everything and say, okay, you know, just fill in the blanks, it just, I don't know what it is, but it kills it. There has to be some room for play in there. I'll usually have a general idea. Like for this one, I knew what my anchor spots were gonna be. I knew there had to be the lady with the telephone was gonna be on the corner, the angel was gonna be in the one corner, you know, on that other corner, and the two guys were gonna be on this corner. And then I worked in from there. But I found that even when I was, training as a painter when I was younger, that if I had it too planned out, it would just make the whole thing go dead. It really would. And I don't know how to explain that.
Yes.
You know, I think you want to talk about
It's for as much as you sort of need to sort of like.
It needs to
break more
breathe
a little bit, but you still have to be able to add, and sort of go with what happens when you're actually in the space and.
Yeah.
It's like interior design too, right? Like you can know what color your room's gonna be and the lamp.
Yeah.
Once you put it there, then all of a sudden you know where the mirror goes and all the other pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like, if you can see it too. If you go into a room that's too designed, you feel like you can't breathe, right?
It's gotta be
Yeah.
livable, lived in.
Yeah, it feels boring. You're just like, can somebody please get me out of here? Or can I throw some paint on the wall, or scribble on the wall, or like turn a piece of furniture over, just stuff. I know. My thought. Oh, that reminds me. Okay, so I told you I was going to tell you this story about what happened in my drawing. Can I tell? Can I tell? Okay. So I come in on Monday, and Lauren had asked me if I was going to come in and touch up my drawing. I'm like, yeah, sure, But you guys didn't tell me how bad it was.
No one told me either, is the hilarious part. You were the first one to tell me. I was like, oh, I'm glad everyone sort of.
So I come in, and I was just like, I was just here 2 weeks ago. What happens? There's like clearly somebody had tried to fix it. But because I've been doing this for so long, I do know that people like to touch. And they'll go up, usually it's just very discreet. They'll go up and they'll check, is that chalk? Oh, oops, it's chalk. Busted. Or, their clothes will accidentally drag against. Well, and the guards are very good. And, the worst are grown-ups, and the very worst are artist grown-ups.
Yeah.
Because artists, we feel like we have the right to touch everything. We just do. Because we're artists, we make stuff, so therefore we should be allowed to touch. So, but mostly kids have been actually better. But this was every other exhibit had come down, I think.
And we left because downstairs was staying the same. We sort of had it open, so if people came on the days we were open and wanted to see something, they could come in. And school groups were also coming in, but only to the downstairs.
So I come in, and clearly something had happened. And somebody tried to fix it. And there was smears of chalk. You could tell it had been cleaned, but the chalk wasn't all coming off, and they tried to redraw, and I was just like, okay, every other time that I came in to touch it up, it didn't look like this. And so as I'm cleaning, I had to repaint sections and do some more drawing. And as I'm cleaning it, one of the guards came in and he told me that he knew what had happened. I said, so you saw it? He goes, no, I saw the little kid afterwards. He said, killer. 2-year-old had come upstairs and he was covered in chalk. I just, did you get a picture? Because I would like to see it. But, apparently this kid just decided to get up close and personal with artwork.
Rub a section out, a eraser?
I really don't know. Nobody has had the courage to tell me. They should have photographed it. I would like to see it.
I honestly, no one even, I don't know.
They were probably trying to hide it from you.
But now you all will notice we have the barriers sort of around it.
It's kind of a shame,
Yeah.
but yeah. No, I mean, it's weird because, of course, I know that I'm taking a risk by having the chalk there. It is what it is. People are mostly very respectful, to tell you the truth. A 2-year-old, he's a 2-year-old. Who can blame him? But seriously, I've done several of these now, and even that, I mean, considering the
For how
damage,
long it was
it could,
up.
I mean, it was up for 5 months before anything serious happened. And that was a 2-year-old, you know, it's like, they're 2, what do they, you know, what can you do? But, yeah, speaking of messing up furniture and throwing paint on it, that just sparked that thought.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's getting
Yeah,
close.
I think-
I don't want to hold you guys hostage like all night long, but.
If there are no, one more question.
Yes.
Can you talk more about your interest in science fiction, and if you're like interested in like, is it just science fiction architecture, or if it's ideas about utopia and transcendence, or it's both, or like, what is it?
Yeah, the architecture is because I'm interested in architecture, period. Sci-fi, I've been in love with sci-fi since I was a kid. And, you know, like a lot of kids, Ray Bradbury was my first sci-fi. Well, actually, I take that back. Probably, it's probably Madeleine L'Engle, you know, Wrinkle in Time. Yeah, but I just like this idea of the speculating, alternative realities, alternate futures. I've read both utopian and dystopian novels, and the I was really into the post-apocalyptic thing for a while, because I don't know what that says about me, but I was really into it. I don't know. I go through phases, but like it's just something, I just like things that really stretch your imagination. And truthfully, the fairy tale mythology thing that I mentioned earlier, it's sort of a similar thing. The other thing I think that I like about science fiction, along with the fairy tales, mythology, comic books, and things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I love Buffy, is that it's always wrestling with those big themes, you know, good versus evil, and that there's no pure good, pure evil, you know. It's always sort of these big ideas, big questions, and I think a lot of things get thought through in that, and I think that's really, really interesting. But, yeah, it's good stuff. And I know it's not for everybody, it's really funny, because I have a very good friend who just can't get into it. Like the whole sci-fi fantasy thing just like misses her entirely. And I'm just like, you don't have to feel bad, it's just not your thing. Like, I can't do romance novels, just can't do it. Like, I tried too for like a hot minute when I was in high school. It was boring, I'm sorry, it's just like, Harlem and romance, are you kidding me? But, you know, I just think it's really fascinating. There are all these alternative realities. The reality that we're in isn't necessarily what has to be. I like that idea. And, you know, honestly, if it weren't for these sort of speculative thoughts, there's a lot of things that never would take place. You know, a lot of us wouldn't be sitting here right now if somebody wasn't positing an alternative reality. So, there you go. That's my little soapbox thing for the day.
And I have one little extra to add to bounce off of.
Go for it.
Did I see, I'm not a sci-fi buff, but I love the Twilight Zone. Yes. Like I have the whole box.
The box set. And what's crazy about the box set, there's stuff on the box set that you never see on television, ever.
Did I see Twilight Zone Museum up there?
There's a Twilight Zone museum somewhere, I don't know where it is, but yeah.
Oh, what world is me? I gotta go.
That has something for everybody.
Thank you so much.
Jessica, thanks again to both Lauren and Kira for a great presentation. Thank you all for joining us, and please do come again on April 12th for our talk with Leonardo Drew, and please see the exhibition before you head out. You have another half an hour to enjoy the galleries. Thank you again, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for your